Thursday, September 12th. Calling the Utilities Committee to order. Madam Clerk, there's no need to call the roll. We're not hearing legislation today. I'm a very prompt and on-time individual. We have myself and Councilman Harsh here. Hopefully other individuals will be rolling in. Today, what we're going to do is we're going to get an update from Cleveland Public Power, First Energy, AT&T, and Spectrum in regards to the aftermath or the storm and preventative measures going forward. What we're going to do is I'm going to call each individual entity up one at a time, and then if I can ask you to stay around, and then we're going to open it up for questions at the end for each individual organization. So at this time, we'd like to call Cleveland Public Power up first, then we're going to go with First Energy, then we're going to go with AT&T, and then Spectrum. So if Cleveland Public Power can come to the table, and I believe you have a presentation, Director?
Yes, Chairman.
So as everybody knows, August 6th is when the storm hit the city of Cleveland. It was an unprecedented storm. I believe we had 4 tornadoes touch down. In lieu of that storm, at no fault to anybody who's in the room today, residents of the city of Cleveland lost utilities, they lost power, they lost everything, food, in the aftermath of this storm. So this is going to be kind of a recap of what happened, as well as how we make things better going forward if something like this happens again. So, Director?
Thank you, Chairman. Members of the committee, good morning. Thank you for the opportunity to be here today. First, by way of introduction, from the Department of Public Utilities, Marty Kane, Director, Executive Commissioner Danielle Graham, from Cleveland Public Power, Commissioner Ammon Danielson, Assistant Commissioner Bernie Jackson to my left, Assistant Commissioner Aaliyah McBooth, and then Chief Superintendent Jim Ferguson to the right. This is I know CPP was kind of the primary focus, but if I could, just a moment on the other utilities specific to Cleveland Water. On August the 6th at 4 o'clock, Crown Water Treatment Plant did lose all power. Plant operations had anticipated it coming and had the backup generators fully functioning before we lost power. Not one customer was affected out of Crown. Nottingham and Garrett Morgan both lost a single feed, but luckily there's redundant feeds, so they were able to fully operate during the results of the storm. We had a number of secondary substations lose complete power. They would be Engel, Parma, Independence, Broadway, Pleasant Valley, Cedar, Aurora, and Shepherd lost full power. We did have backup generators at the necessary substations, which were Parma, Broadway, Aurora, and Shepherd, which maintained pressure and operations for all customers of Cleveland Water at all times. So I would certainly commend the staff and the engineering groups and our redundancy and our resilient water system to maintain service to those customers throughout this incident. For the Division of Water Pollution Control, certainly it was reactionary, the number of trees down in the city of Cleveland and then work that happened to clear that debris. Our primary focus was catch basins and cleaning those catch basins from debris in the event of additional inclement weather. So Water Pollution Control did immediately get out there to the affected areas and inspect catch basins to ensure that stormwater in the event of would not in any way inhibit the rights of way. So all 3 divisions were very busy during this week. All 3 divisions performed well. Very happy with the staff and the responsiveness from the Department of Public Utilities. But I know the focus of this hearing and the notice that went out was specific to Cleveland Public Power. So at this time, I will hand it over to Commissioner Ammon Danielson to go through the PowerPoint presentation.
And before you go, that's a great point, Director, because I didn't even think about water, and it's probably because we didn't lose water.
Right. We thought about it.
So I'm sure it was high on your mind, but I didn't get one call regarding water. So
luckily,
thank you. So kudos going out to that aspect of DPU.
Thank you, Chairman.
Commissioner.
All right. Good morning. Thank you, and thank you for the opportunity to review this with all of you. First, just real quick. You'll see this was a pretty unprecedented storm event for us. I'll briefly show our current system and then walk through a bit of our restoration process, how we respond, how we responded, our storm communications, including essentially the sequence of events and restoration, and as well as our estimated costs and at least what we have so far today. Essentially, this is a slide I imagine you all have seen before, or at least somewhat familiar with. This and the next one will provide some context, especially when you look at the outage map and see that there is substantial overlap. Again, on this one, this is our kind of more specific to our service territory. Thankfully, none of our substations were taken out. I'm getting a little ahead of myself, but just wanted to mention those transmission lines that are essential. We did have one trip out, but thankfully there were no customers impacted with that, thanks to system redundancy. For the storm restoration itself, so for this, I'd like to start out actually with a question, a fairly common one that I get, that we get, which is, why can't I see CPP crews working? If you imagine for a second, if the people at this table are each their own neighborhoods, and there's a circuit that winds around to get power to all of us. Maybe there's a substation behind Councilwoman Spencer. The tail end is behind Bernie down there. Everybody gets power. Everybody is served power. And in this case, for the storm, everybody is out of power. So we would start probably at that substation and drive out the circuit. When I say drive out, we would follow that circuit. We would look for issues. We would look for trees down, wires down, that kind of thing. So at some point in that restoration, you might just see a CPP truck drive by. And then the power's still out, and you're wondering why the power's still out. You're still not seeing the CPP truck. Maybe towards the tail end of that line, they find an issue. They pull the limb off the wire, they put the wire back up, but still, everybody at this table, the only person that might have seen them would be Councilman Kelly. Maybe Bernie himself, if he's at the tail end and it happens to be nearby. So Bernie's on the other side. Apologies to the audience. I thought Bernie was on the other side of Jim. So Bernie, still without power, still has no idea what's going on. And at this point, so we have restored part of the line, but this circuit still doesn't have power. So we have to go back to, we've got a different crew that's at the substation behind Councilwoman Spencer. That, unless you're very lucky, you will never have even seen that crew. They confirm that everybody's in the clear, they get on the radio, make sure that no one's touching the line or actively working on the line, and then they re-energize that circuit. And then everybody gets power back for the most part. And during that time, the vast majority of the people that live in those neighborhoods will not have seen a crew, maybe seen a crew drive by. Now, in this case as well, maybe myself, Director Kane, are unlucky. There is a secondary issue. So everybody else still has power. We're still sitting there in the dark. So after that overall circuit is re-energized, that's when we see, okay, there is a secondary issue. So it's a different crew then that goes back. Maybe there's a line down in a backyard somewhere. So we go back, we have to cut through trees, maybe multiple trees, rerun wire. Finally, Director and I get our power back, or should get our power back, except he's extra unlucky. He likes his trees. He had an old tree limb fall down and take the service pipe off of his house. Now we have a meter crew that comes out, puts that service pipe back up for him. So that's kind of the sequence of events. And that is an example that happened multiple times throughout the city. The kind of high-level steps that we go through, like I said, start out with the high-voltage transmission. That can impact the most people, tens of thousands of people. Thankfully, that did not happen in this case. Then we have the higher voltage primary distribution lines. That's the circuit that I was describing that would affect all of us. Then we go to the local distribution lines. actually, and I skipped substations. Thankfully, like I said, we didn't have any substations go out. That would be the next thing after primary or high voltage transmission. So substations, main distribution, secondary distribution, finally the individual house loops and service pipes. And that's essentially the sequence of events that we go to. It sounds like it might be clear cut. In reality, there tends to be some overlap. It's more complicated than that. Well, we have a crew out there working on a primary line. Maybe they actually saw the issue in the backyard, so they call another crew. There are multiple crews working at the same time. The meter crews often will be out there. They will know that there is an issue with an individual house loop. They will be working on that at the same time. But in terms of our primary crews and the sequence of events, that is the order of priority in essence, to make sure that we are helping the most customers that we can. Now, in terms of storm communications, this map actually it is a snapshot of our outage map that we introduced earlier this year. And all of this is, you mentioned, Chair, started on August 6th. It was a little after 4 o'clock. At least the forecast that I looked at earlier in the day was maybe some sprinkles. I was starting to wonder if the mayor's night out for safety was still going to happen. It still was, so I didn't think too much more of it. And then the sky got really dark, and the wind kicked up much more than I was expecting. And about 30 minutes later, I was really starting to wonder, like, I guess if I'm there, I'm probably not going to be seeing too many people. But then the calls started rolling in. Trees down on houses, trees down in streets, and of course, for us, trees down on power lines and taking out our lines, and then the outage reports started rolling in. In that time, and as you'll see up there, for the peak, I think there were around 36,000 CPP customers that lost power. Around 70 feeders, 65 of those feeders directly customer impacting. That is definitely a record for CPP. Some of you, I imagine, remember the tornado from last year. That's about 3 times as many, 3 times the impact, maybe a little more. Certainly very, very widespread. I do want to say, especially while looking at this and the initial response, I am very proud of our CPP employees. They jumped on this immediately. Depending on the time, some of them had already left, immediately turned back around, came back in. Over those next hours, we had people on the phones working well into the night. We had people out in the field working all night. There was actually a Cleveland.com article highlighting a couple of our crew members, which I appreciate, the Montanez cousins. I think over that 2-week time frame, they worked a little over 200 hours each. And much of that, of course, in the initial response. So we had everyone on hand responded. Our superintendent of trouble, I have to say, did a fantastic job organizing this as well. Just really impressed with essentially everyone who supported that event. For time's sake, I won't go through all of their contributions, but just I am grateful. So in terms of, again, this is storm communications, but also reflecting the course of the recovery. In the first 24 hours, we restored power to about 16,000 customers. That translates to about 29 feeders. More than we were able to do last year, actually. So again, an actually improved response there. Over the course of the next day, between 8/8 and 8/9, the hardest hit areas still had higher numbers without power, but we were able to, again, restore a substantial number of those that were out. On 8/8, so it's up right now, we also had our first wave of outside support roll in. We had contractors arrive that morning and were quickly deployed. We had them working on some of our larger jobs to minimize our need to kind of move them around and get the most support out of them that we could. So I think one of the big ones that they were working on was a significant, just a mess in a street near an intersection, multiple poles down, lots of wires everywhere. So that's the kind of thing that we had them focus on that we could more easily oversee, while the rest of our crews, more knowledgeable in our system, were out spread throughout the city. On the 9th, again, now we're up to more than 33,000 customers restored. This is when our mutual aid crews arrived. So we had crews from Hudson, Wadsworth, and Orville arrive. They all worked, or they worked through, I think, 8:15. This direct support from other AMP members made a huge difference getting us through the worst of this. For these crews, I will say they had actually someone who used to live in Cleveland, familiar with our system, here from AMP, helping to facilitate and support as well. So we were able to use them a bit more flexibly. They helped in some of our hardest hit backyard areas for the most part. And then finally on the 10th is when we had all of our feeders restored, or switched around, I should say. Some of them might have still been out, but we were able to switch around them. This isn't when we had all of our customers back. We think at this time it was approximately 95% restored by the 10th. Recovery work then continued for weeks. This is the stage where we switched to relatively small pockets of customers. That can still be up to 100 or 200 at a time, but not like that big circuit that affects 500 or 1,000 customers. But then all the way down to we have a single street, for example. Maybe we'll have 5 or 10 customers on the end of one street, and limbs down at every house that it's still essentially a similar amount of work to get those last 5 on. And then this is going back and making permanent repairs to things that we had made temporarily safe before. Our communications during this time, other than the outage map, of course, is on social media. Our reach is actually extended rather significantly, thankfully, so we're able to get in touch with our customers a bit easier. And then that Friday, I think on the 9th, we started sending out twice daily reports to this council and specific media releases as well. And then, of course, finally, storm communications. One of our most significant channels is still direct phone support. We prioritize that so that anyone can get in contact with us almost regardless of their level of technological access. During this time frame, we had more than 30,000 calls come in. That was just the first week. Of course, there was a big spike at the beginning. For the most part, our average time to respond, I see there was 6 minutes and 52 seconds, and that is accurate. I will say much of the time it was less than 2 minutes. That is an area that we improved substantially over last year. I also want to mention we do have upfront messaging that helps communicate where we're at in the storm recovery. And so certainly not all of those 30,000 calls we needed to pick up. Many of them called, got the upfront messaging, and then dropped off the line. And then in terms of estimated costs, now that we are more or less through the response, right now it looks like over $1.3 million. This includes, of course, a rather substantial amount for labor, both our own and the external support from our contractor and the AMP member mutual aid crews. For us, and especially given our footprint, I will say putting up nearly 30,000 feet of wire that's a huge amount. 754 splices. Splices essentially could be where we are repairing existing wire or splicing in new wire. All of this is equipment counts that would take us weeks or months to go through in a normal course. For context, I'd say we in terms of maintenance, we probably put up maybe 1 to 3 poles a week. On that note, and throughout all of this, safety is paramount, and unfortunately, hit poles were still an issue. I know on one of those days, I think it was Friday, we restored a circuit, and less than 2 hours later, those same customers lost power thanks to a hit pole. So even during the course of the storm recovery, we still have our regular recovery to go through. Okay, sorry, and then no, we're trying to stay on time. So in terms of summary, we're now in the middle of our lessons learned, going back through this, accounting for all of the costs, reviewing our invoices, for example, and making sure that things are where they should be. In terms of overall customers restored, happy to say it was 85% by that third day, and we took advantage of our new outage map, our I think increased cross-training, for example, between our trouble dispatch and our call centers. We had many more people trained, ready, and available to immediately jump on the phones and start helping there. And then, of course, the support from our AMP mutual aid members and that external contractor also helped significantly. So I have to say I'm very grateful for them as well. Last note, in terms of things that we have improved over the last year, wanted to mention we've recruited 5 line workers. We promoted 3 from apprentice to journey line worker. I think we're going to be promoting another 3, topping them out. I believe by the end of this year. Like I mentioned, cross-training and much more training to help respond to a situation like this on the phones. Tree trimming certainly is very relevant in responding to something like this. We recruited, so we have a whole new crew. We've got 4 crews now, 5 trucks to make sure that they can always be rolling. We spent about $1.5 million in the last year and a half or so on contractor tree trimming as well, so they can get out into areas that are more dense. They have more specialized equipment to really help with some of the denser backyards. All right, again, interest of time, I'll stop there, but very much appreciate your time as well. Thank you.
All right, thank you very much. If you guys can stick around, though.
Yep.
Because we just want to hear the presentations, and then we'll open it up for questions.
Thank you.
So, First Energy. Thank you, Commissioner. Thank you, Director.
Thank you.
And again, First Energy also has a presentation. They're not going anywhere. Hard copy? Madam Clerk, can we get paper copies of any of the presentations, if you could get those for us, please? First Energy, welcome. If you want to introduce your team.
Alderman, good morning.
Good morning.
Good morning, good afternoon, everyone.
Good morning.
I'm David Turner, First Energy, Ohio External Affairs Manager. First, I want to thank Utility Chair Brian Casey for this opportunity to discuss our information regarding this historic weather event. With me today, I have my Director of Operations to my right, Andy Lubitsch, and my Vision Manager, Frank McGraw.
Good morning, gentlemen.
David Turner.
I thought everybody knew you, Dave.
There's still a few. Our work first on the front lines and behind the scenes helped us get through this significant event efficiently and, most importantly, safely, without a single major safety incident recorded during this effort. We'll be covering a range of topics, including the outage impact, weather forecast, preparation and initial response, restoration overview, system impacts and restoration progress, as well as our public outreach and key takeaways. So while my presentation today is focused on Cleveland, I want to mention that more than 627,500 customers of ours lost service due to the severe storms that swept across Northeast Ohio, Pennsylvania, Maryland, West Virginia, and New Jersey on August 6th. The powerful and historic storm system brought strong winds exceeding 80 miles per hour in parts of Ohio, western Pennsylvania, along with rainfall exceeding 2 inches and parts of eastern Pennsylvania and New Jersey. Here in Ohio, 5 tornadoes with winds up to 110 miles per hour tore through the greater Cleveland area, 2 of which directly impacted the Westlake community. We also experienced a macro burst, which is a wide area of damaging straight line winds between 70 and 90 miles per hour, covering an area of roughly 225 square miles, 50 miles wide by 50 miles long, in Cuyahoga, Lake, and Geauga counties. While the National Weather Service and company meteorologists were expecting the potential for a seasonal storm in the area, the severe magnitude and widespread nature of these storms were not predicted. As you see here under the weather model that we had, and that also one produced by the National Weather Service, this is what our prep work was before a weather event. Our FirstEnergy in-house meteorologists continually track the weather and monitor conditions most likely to cause electrical service disruptions. As you can see here, the weather model guidance used by both the National Weather Service and our FirstEnergy weather team understated the impact of the storms until they formed. Similarly, our automated storm impact predictions for customers expected to be impacted were also slightly less than expected. Looking at the area, nearly 500,000 customers in Ohio lost power due to the August 6 storms. The greater Cleveland area was the hardest hit area. More than 353,000 customers across Ashtabula, Cuyahoga, Geauga, and Lake and Lorain counties. And Cleveland specifically, more than 56,000 customers were out. FirstEnergy updated our outage map tools, and those were put to the test during the storms and were very successful. I hope most of you saw and used that tool. The map even popped during local media storm coverage to help illustrate how serious the damage was and just how much work our crews faced as they got everyone back online. You can see that demonstrated in the time-lapse clips. That might not function. The time-lapse clips showed the progression of the service restoration on the outage map throughout the event. Our Emergency Operations Center activation. At the first hint of the August 6 storms, we activated our storm response plan, which allowed us to put additional resources, including contractor crews and personnel from mutual assistance organizations on standby and mobilize personnel to the hardest hit areas following the event. In addition to this August 6 storm, our teams also monitored Tropical Storm Debbie's track and engaging with mutual assistance organizations. Our Ohio Electric Company is appropriately prepared based on the initial forecast, ensuring coverage and staffing plans were in place. FirstEnergy's Emergency Operations Center, which we refer to as our EOC, is always on a steady state monitoring posture. Partial activation occurred when it is deemed a potential impact may occur to FirstEnergy systems and when there are response activity being planned or executed among partner utilities. Our EOC has been engaged in situational awareness activities with our mutual assistance partners regarding Debbie resource movement throughout the Southeast. But to be clear, FirstEnergy did not send any company or contractor resources as all needs were met geographically closer. And I want to emphasize this point because in having conversations with others on council, there is a rumor that's been stated that we were sending people outside of the Cleveland area, which we did not. The EOC was also monitoring our storm impact prediction model as well as our internal meteorological alerts as part of our standard protocol. Based on weather models you've already seen, the Ohio operating companies were appropriately preparing for the expected impact. Widespread distribution impact. The FirstEnergy restoration model is dynamic and expands from the dispatch of crews by distribution control centers to the dispatch of crews to other organizations such as Hazard, Line, Forestry, Service through distributed dispatching. During the first 48 hours of this storm, our efforts were focused on responding and making safe more than 430 911 reported emergencies, over 460 road closure reports, and thousands of customer reported emergencies. Following the safety of the public and continuity of the electrical system efforts, we shifted the focus to the largest customer account outages in parallel with restoring priority and critical customers, including hospitals. This large restoration event included restoring 341 distribution circuit lockouts, restoring 8,800 outage incidents, and responding to over 24,000 non-outage damaged locations. Most outages were caused by tree damage or tornado wind damage impacting our facilities. Damage by numbers. Materials replaced during the restoration effort: 75 miles of power lines, 670 poles, 2,679 cross arms, and 359 transformers. And these total cover estimates both in Ohio Edison and the Illuminating Company. As we stated earlier, there's a large amount of tree damage that occurred. This storm, due to its size and scale, brought a lot of unique challenges. The volume of uprooted whole trees and large limb failure was just catastrophic. Our professional contractors did an outstanding job with safety and efficiency using their specialty equipment to clear roads for the public and our facility for our line service organizations to make repairs and get our customers restored. I want to touch on some key metrics that might really highlight the effort to impact vegetation management that has overall restore restoration activities. Forestry dispatched over 4,900 events or jobs throughout this restoration event. We engaged 884 professional workers across our First Energy footprint, as well as 165 mutual aid contractors. Looking at some of our outage metrics, we do not require cause codes or classifications for all tree-caused outages, so we can't understand how vegetation is affecting our system. We code tree outages as on right-of-way, off right-of-way, off right-of-way, limb, and secondary service. This storm, nearly 80% of all trees caused customer minutes interrupted came off right-of-way trees. So in other words, we look at some of our outages in our service territory, nearly 80% were caused by trees that were off of our right-of-way, thus on the customer's property, but not within the right-of-way of our service. Lastly, after the storm, our post-storm procedures, we patrolled over 4,000 miles of line across Ohio and CEI, and identified and mitigated 423 hazards. Within the Cleveland area, we looked at 27 circuits, 171 miles that impacted Cleveland. We found 28 locations that needed additional forestry work. Let's get into our restoration timeline. The timeline you see here depicts actions taken with the estimated time of events restorations, which we commonly refer to as our ETR. As part of our normal practice, when significant storms impact the service area, we suspend these estimated restoration times when it was clear the storm was causing widespread outages and extensive damage. The initial global time of restoration represents an estimate of when service will be restored to nearly all customers following a major outage event. The global estimates are established while crews are restoring power and assessing the full extent of the damage. Work to restore power to customers around the clock, and many customers will have service restored sooner, based on the level of damage in their area. We take this action to ensure customers are not getting incorrect information about expected restoration. Our outage maps were updated noting the severe weather was impacting the area, and the ETR would be established as soon as possible. Our first ETR were established for the Illuminating Company on August 7th. Early on August 11th, we determined that based on our resources and process being made, we'd be able to revise and pull the global ETR for our customers. We carefully coordinated to ensure better communication around the major update, and by late August 13th, we had completed restoration to all customers impacted by the storm. So as you look here, restoration completed timely and safely. As you can see on the graph, power was restored to 85% of our customers within 100 hours of this historic weather event. Half of the customers impacted by the storm were restored within 51 hours. This is a huge feat given the extent of the damage and the number of safety locations which were also responded to in the first 2 days. Customer restoration is as follows: 28% in the first 24 hours, 47% in the first 48 hours, 50% in the first 51 hours, 85% in 100 hours, and 95% in 124 hours. August 11th by 6 o'clock p.m. Preparation and initial response. About 8,200 personnel from the company, contractors, and mutual assistance organizations were engaged in restoration. First Energy crews in our communities when the storm arrived, and more than 3,000 additional workers joined the effort in less than 24 hours. All of First Energy Ohio crews were ready to respond when the storm hit on August 6th, and none had been sent south to respond to Tropical Storm Debbie. First Energy personnel were joined by outside assistance from 17 states, as represented here on the graphic of the slide. Approximately 6,000 of those were working in the Lumen Company territory, and approximately 1,550 in Ohio Edison territory. As work was completed, additional crews were moved to assist in the Lumen Company area. Post-impact adjustments occur quickly across Ohio after we realized the extent of the damage caused by the storms. We fully activated our Emergency Operations Center. We began working with our contractors and mutual assistance partners to secure outside assistance. To minimize downtime and allow for manageable spans of control, the impacted areas within the Lumen Company were divided into 4 zones. And once our scalable incident command structure allowed us to strategically place experienced operations leadership like Andy, like Frank, to allow flexibility tailored to their specific damage footprint. This also allowed for a more accurate and targeted daily work planning process that bolstered information sharing and resource management activities. Each zone has an operations sections chief, which holds the role of directors of operations in Ohio. All support branches were fully staffed and mobilized to assist in this effort. Material staging sites were quickly established to keep needed materials and crew resources closer to the impacted areas and to minimize congestion within our line shops. Keeping our customers, regulators, and community leaders informed. Our external affairs team, such as myself and Mr. Collins, began communicating with public officials as the storms impacted the area and proactive messaging and seeking to understand critical community needs, including emergency management agencies, escalation of road closures, and critical facility outages. I definitely want to take time to thank city officials, especially Mayor Bibb, COO Bonnie, Council President Blaine Griffin, as we met with them and communicated with them for a daily update. External Affairs continued to receive inbound requests for information and escalation throughout the storm and provided appropriate operations staff for response. Water and ice distribution sites were established across the service territory. In partnership with Mayor Bibb and Council President Blaine Griffin, First Energy coordinated to do bulk water and ice distribution in 4 city Cleveland recreation centers. Those centers were Commonwealth Recreation Center, Caldwell Recreation Center, Michael Zone Recreation Center, and Zelma Watson George Recreation Center. From an outreach perspective, frequent and consistent communication following a severe weather event like the one we just had is a must. Customers understandably want to know when their power will be restored. They cannot see all the work that takes place before, but we can begin safely making repairs to get them back up and running. When the storm passed, we immediately began communicating with our customers, the media, and other external stakeholders to inform them of the extent of the damages. As you can see from this slide, we provide consistent and clear communication, including news releases, more than 100 media interviews, social media, customer emails, and through our website. Throughout this event, members of the communications department were in the field taking photos and videos of the storm damage across Northeast Ohio, showing our crews hard at work. Whether we share these materials through social media, customer emails, or directly with our news media, they help paint a picture of what our field personnel were facing and make customers aware of the widespread damage and more empathetic to our restoration efforts. It's also worth noting that we partner with the National Industry Association, Edison Electric Institute on safety-related messaging concerning the extent of the damage. With that, I'm going to stop here for any additional questions.
We're going to wait on questions until everybody, so thank you very much for the presentation,
that.
but if you could please stick around, okay?
We'll be here.
We're going with AT&T next. Come on up, Tony. Is that it? All right, Tony, you want to introduce yourself, your guest, and
Thank you, Councilman. I am Tony Costanzo, the Director of AT&T External Affairs for Northern Ohio. With me today, I have my colleague, AT&T Field Operations Construction Manager, Sean Gath, who handles the Cleveland market. So I kind of want to get started and thank my colleagues who just presented for all their hard work in making areas safe for our guys to come in and work. Kudos to them for doing it promptly, safely, and expeditiously. We appreciate the partnership that we have with them. So, not going to regurgitate the data that was just presented because it's the same stuff that I got from the August 6 storms of what happened. But typically, AT&T is always last to come in because we're last on the poles. So we have to wait till areas are cleared and safe for our workers to come in and do their work. So we had, from the storm, over 40,000 customers that were affected, basically because of power outages, internet, TV services were not working. We had over 70 cell towers go down. We had 16 central offices lose power and go to backup generator. And our main priority was our FirstNet network for our first responders. So any cell tower that has FirstNet on it that any first responder, police, fire, EMS is on is a priority for us. So we would deploy a FirstNet SATCOL if we couldn't get a cell tower down. Fortunately, we have battery backup and some backup power to some cell towers, and we were able to keep those up and running. And any cell tower that did go down, we did optimize the network. So folks did have service, whether it wasn't 5 bars, but they still had service the way we optimized their network. So no first responders lost connectivity. So we got backup generators within 24 hours to our cell towers. Worked with our counterparts with First Energy to keep our central offices working, so they were on backup generators. So those are priority ones because of 911 circuits and things of that nature. So I'm going to stop there because typically we wait to restore, like I said, we wait for power to clear hazards and do that before we come in and do any work. So most of our affected work was trees coming down, taking down service drops from poles to houses. Didn't really have any main feeder distributions here and there, but once poles and things of that nature restored and tree obstacles were cleared, we were able to come in and do our work expeditiously within the same time frame that they restored their service. So we had to wait basically until they cleared out, and then we came in and did our things. Residually, we did have some stragglers, and we always ask folks to call those in to our 800 number, which is pretty easy to call, and anything that was relayed to us, either through council, through power, or whoever I was emailed or we were contacted, we got those taken care of as well. So,
all right, just one quick question for you, and then if you could just hang out until we open up for questions. You can't bring your service back online until the electricity is restored, correct? Okay, all right, I just wanted to make that clarified. All right, anything else?
no, that's it.
All right, cool. If you could just hang out for one little bit.
Gotcha.
And then we have Spectrum.
Morning.
Good morning, Ms. Williams, how are you?
Doing pretty good.
If you could introduce yourself and your guest.
Sure, we will do that. All right. All right. Good morning, Chairman Casey and members of the Utilities Committee. My name is Sandra Williams, Director of Government Affairs for Charter Communications, doing business at Spectrum. With me today is Jim Hyam. He is our Director of Field Engineering. Charter, through our Spectrum brand of companies, is a leading broadband connectivity company and cable operator serving more than 32 million customers in 41 states. Some top facts about Spectrum: we have 2.8 million customers served in Ohio, 160 million paid in taxes and fees in 2023, 879 million in capital investments, and we have over 7,700 people working in Ohio, with 2,000 of those being in Northeast Ohio. The Great Lakes region has experienced numerous storms this summer, causing disruptions to services. Restoring services after major weather events is not an easy task because infrastructure can be damaged and conditions often are grueling. The recent weather impacting parts of the Great Lakes region was no different. At least 5 tornadoes ripped through the Cleveland region, resulting in more than 470,000 power outages at the height of it all, and interrupting service for more than 343,000 Spectrum customers. More than 300 employees from across Ohio, Michigan, and beyond gathered in impacted areas to work on restoration. When storms like these occur, not only are we working to restore service, but we are also monitoring network performance, coordinating with additional dispatch centers, and working with external partners, including the power companies, that must restore their service before any of our recovery efforts can begin. After 1 week of around-the-clock work, our crews restored services to all affected customers in this region. All outages are handled as quickly as possible, regardless of the reason. In customer operations, the communication desk monitors outages across impacted areas, so our customer service representatives have the most up-to-date information. Our regional operations centers dispatch maintenance technicians to assess damage, and local leadership engages with construction and contractor resources to deploy teams out for restoration. While we work to restore service, we also notify our customers when we have outages, such as power outages, fiber cuts, storm damage, and the like. Usually, these processes are triggered by an outage-causing event. However, when we have significant and reliable storm forecast, we try to give our customers proactive notice of a risk to their service. Once impacted customers are identified through our network monitoring systems or other notification, we notify customers of an outage event using the method of communication they prefer, such as email, text, or an automated phone call. When we can reliably inform our customers of an estimated time of restoration, we also include that information on their call or text. With that, Mr. Chairman, that concludes my testimony, and we'll await questioning.
I just have one question for
Sure.
you. How many Cleveland customers were affected by the storm?
I don't have that specific number,
It was
but
roughly 230,000.
230,000?
the expert is here to answer those things.
Okay, what we're going to do from here is, we have a presentation from Cleveland City Council on polls that we would like to show. We're going to show everything. After we show our presentation, we'll bring everybody back up to the table for questions regarding, we have some questions for all the entities.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. So, as Chair of Utilities, one of the big questions that I always get are regarding conditions of poles. And the city of Cleveland, which used to be known as the Tree City or the Forest City, has slowly become Pole City, USA. And that is because there are a number of poles in the city of Cleveland where we're not sharing lines on poles. And for one example, I know in Ward 16, within a 2-block radius, we have 26 poles sitting on a major thoroughfare. So we also have a difficult time regarding conditions of poles. So we just wanted to show some examples of some poles that we're dealing with in our neighborhoods. And we included the poles, and we included the addresses on most of them. As you can see with this one here, obviously, we don't know how it's standing, but there's one that's even worse than that coming up. This one, we know who has this one. This was a pole that was in somebody's front yard that was taken down, but not completely taken down. We also have another pole that has been laying on a major thoroughfare for going on 3 months now. And if you look at that, it looks like that pole is going to be replaced, which is one of the questions I have, because if we already have a standing pole, why do we need to put another pole up without taking that pole down? Another example of a pole that was hit by a vehicle, and a new pole was put up, but the old pole, it just seems that they weren't connected with each other. So instead of just having one pole on somebody's tree lawn, we have 2 poles sitting there. Same thing on this one here, as the old pole that was hit, for some reason, is secured at the bottom by, appears to be 2 pieces of wood and some metal strapping. I don't even know how that one's still standing. Again, we have a pole that was hit, 2 poles simultaneously, and this is going to be one of the questions that we're going to ask of the 4 entities that are here about collaborating with poles. Here's another example of a pole that was hit, and the pole is tied to a building, and a new pole was put up, but the old pole was left. Again, who's responsible for poles that seem to be damaged at the bottom of the poles where they look like they're rotting away? And then there's some other ones that were already addressed. So if we could have CPP, First Energy, Spectrum, and AT&T come back up to the table. All right, my first question, and I'm just going to direct this to the table, and whomever wants to answer it, and it's okay if CPP and First Energy want to sit next to each other. You don't have to, you know, that's just me that feels that way. All right, kumbaya. All right, my first question to the table is, even throughout the storm, or even leading up to the storm, just on your everyday regular basis, is there communication amongst all 4 organizations as to when something like this happens, how can we help each other, right? How can First Energy assist CPP, assist AT&T, assist Spectrum, right? I mean, we're very unique in the city of Cleveland, is that we have a municipally owned power company, and we have competition, and we're the only city in the U.S. that has that. However, how do we collaborate better, not only moving forward, but in the midst of the storm? CPP had to go out and get external help. First Energy had to go out and get external help. AT&T and Spectrum are waiting for those entities to come back online before they can restore their services. So is there ever a collaboration, or can we have a collaboration moving forward where, hey, look, I understand this is a First Energy area, but our main goal is our customers, right? And not just Cleveland Public Power customers, but the residents and First Energy customers. So is there a collaboration in the works now, or can we at least plan one for the future where if something like this happens, our main goal from this side of the table is to make sure that every Cleveland resident is restored with all their utilities as fast as possible without having territorial boundaries in the wake of something like this? So whomever would like to answer that question first.
Thank you, Chairman, members of the committee again. So in terms of storm response and collaboration between the entities at the table, I can say yes. Unquestionably, it can't happen without each knowing what is happening. Poles are unique in the city of Cleveland and very difficult in many instances. As council's aware, in 2008, there was a significant transaction with First Energy for poles, thousands of poles in the jurisdiction of the city of Cleveland that were taken over by the city from First Energy, primarily on the streetlight side, along with other fixtures. But storm response, collaboration, I would say just briefly that yes. I mean, the level of collaboration was good. Could it always be better? I would say yes, without question. Our dispatch center contacts, through the PUCO about a high rise that's out of power, that's in First Energy, that we're getting all the calls for. Water plants that are in First Energy, we call them directly. That is prioritized, right? So, and vice versa. So there's feeders that feed our customers that go through their transmission lines and the other way around. So it can't happen without collaboration, but with collaboration, it could always be better. You're never going to prepare fully or be fully prepared for this level of storm. I mean, nobody knew it. Nobody prepared for it. It was significant. But I would say to your presentation and to council's concerns and to what we talk about regularly at the table about polls and whose are they and who's on, who's off, and who should remove it. Yes, and this will, I think, be the start of a very robust conversation as to a plan moving forward. From the city's perspective, I can only speak to that. Thank you.
Mr. Turner?
Thank you, Chair. And I concur with Director Keene that during the storm event, we're in constant communication with CPP. I know I spoke to Mr. Ferguson on several occasions, as did Mr. Collins. So our goal is to make sure as we're out in the system, looking at damage, identifying customers, there are times we may show up and we're like, oh, this is a CPP customer, needs CPP assistance. We'll reach out to Mr. Ferguson. There are times he reached out directly back to us as well, the same information. As it relates to our pole removal, I'll have Andy speak to that a little bit more specifically. But one of the things that we do have as a system that communicates to all utilities regarding when we have poles that we're going to remove, we're swapping them out, we're putting our facilities back onto a new pole. That communication goes out to the other facilities that are there, AT&T, Spectrum, of the like. So they are notified, at least electronically, as a way of saying that we have poles that need your attention. Andy, you want to add any more?
Yeah, thank you. Just a couple points to make. First and foremost on the storm, certainly second all the comments that were already made about the collaboration and the efforts within the storm. When you think about the events that occurred and the hundreds of thousands of people that were out, that's something that we, and I believe Mr. Turner already mentioned it, had not seen since 1993. So we're talking 30-year event. Do we foresee that type of event in the future? We can't really see that. Can't really say that, can't really see it. But as we move forward as a utility industry, we have to be, I guess we can't be naive to the fact that storms are becoming more severe, more frequent, and we need to be better prepared. And I think part of the actionable items that we can take out of this is from a collaboration perspective is I've heard it numerous times about after action reviews, lessons learned. I think there is a strong possibility or strong opportunity, I should say, between First Energy and all the other utilities that support Cleveland to come together at a table and talk about what those are. We do similar work, different footprints per se, a couple different entities here and there, but nonetheless, we're dealing with line workers, we're dealing with utility industry. There are going to be lessons learned that we will come up with through our robust process. There's going to be lessons learned that CPP comes up with through their robust process that I think there's definitely an opportunity to sit at the table and talk about what those are. Because if we're struggling with it or we're having an issue with it or we identify it as a best practice or a lesson learned, that's certainly something that we can share across the table because it's likely not unique to just First Energy. So we will take that action item across the table on this side to make sure we collaborate about what we've learned from this storm, this event, and how we're going to be better prepared for the next one because we know the next one will happen. As far as Blue Sky Day, pole integrity issues. I mean, that's a constant communication really across the entire footprint. You see examples of poles being tied together. The one example of the pole laying on the ground, obviously that one for us, to me at least, shows that that's a project that's in place. That pole's been identified as needing replaced. In First Energy in Cleveland specific, and we have work crews that go out and they'll pre-stage poles to make it more efficient for our line crews to go out and actually replace it. So they will pre-stage, so sometimes you will see, I'll call it dormant poles laying near a sidewalk in preparation for that crew to come out. When you see the poles that are essentially half height compared to the pole next to it, that's what David was alluding to with respect to those systems that are in place where if we identify there are regulatory requirements, a pole that has to get replaced, we will go out and replace it. We can transfer our utilities, however, we cannot transfer other utilities. So that's where that system becomes very critical because now we are able to communicate to Spectrum, to other entities that we replaced it. The utilities do need removed. If it's our pole, once utilities are transferred, we will come back out and remove that pole.
And I think that becomes the frustrating part, right? Is that there needs to be better collaboration so that we don't have so many poles. You know, to me, it makes no sense having two poles right next to each other, and two of them or one of them's got power and the other one has cable, right? That's the frustrating part, right? Is that when a pole needs to be replaced, you know, the collaboration that needs to go on to assure that if a pole's being replaced and one's being removed, that everybody's ready to move everything at the same time, so that we don't sit here with two different poles or three different poles in some areas, and one's got power, one's got AT&T, one's got Spectrum, right? That's where I think we're looking for a more robust collaboration between our utilities. Ms. Williams, with collaboration, and if you have anything, and then we'll go to Mr. Costanza.
Yeah, on the pole transfer side of things, we utilize spans with First Energy. I believe CPP also uses spans. I could be mistaken. But there's usually electronic communication, and that's how we flow through on the pole transfer side of things.
I don't know what SPANS is. Can you tell me what SPANS is?
Spans is a site that First Energy inputs the information. The different utility companies can go into spans daily, see what comes in. We go out, we do our side of the work, and then we complete it in spans. And First Energy does whatever they need to do on the back end.
Okay.
That's the database that we would utilize to communicate to the other utilities that, hey, we've replaced pole number X. Utilities transferred, it comes back to us, we go and pull that.
And is that just done through email, or would AT&T and Spectrum have ability to go into that system and see?
I'm not sure what interface the other utilities have to come into the system. It's something we can follow up on.
We have access.
Do you have
to-
access?
Yeah, we have access.
The
to
spans will generate an alert that goes to a DL, and then it flows through the process on our end, and then we'll complete it.
Okay.
And then input the completion into spans, and it flows back up through their process.
Okay. CPP does not have access. Do you
That's
guys
correct,
get those?
No.
You don't.
It's just through dispatch.
Okay, all right. Okay, I have a couple more, but I want to open it up to my colleagues. So Councilman Harsh?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Following up on that exact same issue, please, to the table, correct me if I'm wrong, but I would think that transmission lines, power lines always have to be handled first when a pole is erected. The power lines go first, correct? And then telecommunications, right? So my question then becomes to AT&T and Spectrum. When the power company, through the chair, when the power company has moved their lines to a new pole, how high of a priority is it for you to move your lines to that pole, or are your crews off doing other things first before they get around to that?
I'll go through the chair to the councilman. So when we get the notifications through spans, it depends when that's handed off to us, right? So anything we get through spans is a priority. So engineer has to drop a job and say we're transferring cables from one pole to another, and if we need to update, load pole management or any of that stuff, that gets into consideration. And then they'll construct a job, it'll get to Sean's team here, and then his team will go out and transfer the.
Let me ask it this way then, through the chair. What's the average number of days it takes to close out a spans request something goes into spans and says, hey, this pole, we're transferring from pole A to pole B. What's the average number of days it takes for your crews to do your end of the work?
It varies from a couple weeks to a couple months. It all depends.
Okay. And through the chair, why would it take a couple of months?
Through the chair to the councilman, as I mentioned, it would generate an engineer looking at the load pole management, the type of cable we're transferring. It all depends on the workload as well, priorities that are going on. So,
And I guess, Mr. Chair, that's my question is about priorities. It seems like companies tend to prioritize work that is geared towards revenue than work that is simply an expense. And moving a line from one pole to another doesn't really generate revenue. It's just sort of, it's an expense that the utility has to keep up with at some point. And it's probably a much lower priority than work that crews can be doing that is geared towards revenue. If I'm speaking clearly, and I don't want to just put this on AT&T, Spectrum is here as well. Would it be accurate that your crews are primarily focused on work that is geared towards revenue and not just straight up expense?
Our crews are dedicated primarily towards customer impacting events, not really revenue based. It's based on customer impact.
Right. So moving a line from one pole to another doesn't impact the customer's experience. As long as that customer is being fed by one of the poles or the other, it doesn't make a difference which pole the wire is on to you guys, as long as the customer's happy.
Well, it matters to us, but from a priority standpoint,
It's low priority.
it's on the lower end of
Right.
priority, yes.
So, Mr. Chair, I guess, because I see this in my neighborhood too, where you've got two poles and power's on one and telecom's on another. And you kind of wonder how long it's going to take for anybody to get around to it. I don't know what layer of government oversees this. I don't know. Maybe I can ask our friends here. Is there any requirement that you have to respond to a spans entry within a certain period of time, that you have to get out there and get your wires over to that new pole within a 90-day period or 60-day, or is it indefinite and we could just have two poles sitting around forever?
I don't know that we have a specific number. It's best effort on Spectrum side.
Through the chair then, is there a state, federal, or municipal authority that, I guess, what's the word, oversees this type of operation?
Mr. Chairman, Councilman Harsh, I do not know the answer to that question. Sometimes when we have pole issues, not dealing with replacement of poles, we work with the Utilities Commission in Columbus, but specifically about replacing and removing poles so that there is only one. I don't have the answer, but I will get an answer to you.
Let me ask our entities here at the table, though, in regards to that, Councilman Harsh, nobody has to pull a permit to put a pole up in the city of Cleveland, correct? That authority is given to you by the state, isn't it?
I believe so.
We do not, Chairman.
I know.
We do not.
You do not? No. Spectrum does not, right?
Spectrum has very little pole ownership.
Right.
So we're typically renting space from other
Right, but
companies,
if Charter or Spectrum wants to put a pole up, you don't have to come and get a permit and ask
Yeah,
permission
I don't
from
know
the
that
city of
answer
Cleveland.
because we do it so little that
Right, okay.
I don't know that answer.
I
off the top of my head.
understand. Mr. Tony?
I don't believe so, Chairman.
Okay, all right. Go ahead.
That's all I'm getting at. It just seems that these are extremely low priority work because it's not directly related to your profitability as a company. As long as the wire is on one of those poles getting to the customers, you're making your money, and it seems like it's just not a priority. And I'm just looking at, companies as things that are interested in making money, and power lines they're the highest position on the pole, so they have to be dealt with first. It just seems that, once you move down the pole, the priority drops off in terms of, what's of interest to the telecom. And then our neighbors just have to deal with what it looks like. And I think that's what we're driving at here, is that it's unfair that our constituents have to live in neighborhoods with all this excessive, ugly pole because the customers aren't being impacted. Therefore, the telecom industry isn't concerned about making the switch. It just seems to be a pure profit issue.
So I have a quick comment through
Go
the
ahead.
chair to the councilman. So I did share a piece of paper here that's not for public use. This is basically numbers meant for municipality officials, fire, police, power companies, and first responders for broken poles and down cables. Now, this number is 24/7, can be reported at whenever the incident happens. Now, we don't control when people drive into poles, right? But whenever somebody here reaches out, I can speak for myself, we're very proactive and we respond pretty quickly. So, our priorities are, we have PUCO guidelines as well, that we have to respond to people who are out of service. Those are a priority because we have a shot clock with the PUCO, and then we have service affecting. And then we have our construction needs, which this falls under, which there are no service level agreements with the PUCO. But when they are brought to our attention, we do try to handle them in an expeditious manner. And whenever anyone here reaches out to me, and I've worked with Councilman Polensek, we go out within 24 hours to inspect, and Sean and his team has sent an inspector out there to see what it is. Now, because we have joint pole use agreements, we're the lowest on the poles, AT&T is. So we have to wait for everybody to transfer their equipment onto the pole before we can transfer ours, and then the last person off the pole removes the pole. So if we're waiting on another entity, and now remember, there's other entities that people mistaken us for being on the pole, which has happened a lot of late. So you have Crown Castle, you have T-Mobile, a lot of these small cells connecting their own fiber to poles, and we have no interest on it. But right off the rip, people seem to think it's us, and basically relate any pole to a telephone pole, which isn't true. We own very little poles. We joint use with First Energy. We don't have a lot of attachments with CPP. Some that we do are rear poles that we have our own interest on. So there's a history there. Like, we've been around 140 years, right? And as power's come in and added new facilities and poles, and CPP's expanded, we've typically kept our own poles or attached to power. But majority of them are power-owned poles in the city of Cleveland.
All right, go ahead.
That's right.
Are you done?
with that question
Chairman,
out there.
Mr. Chairman,
If you want
I just wanted to add to what Tony said. When there is a pole that needs to be removed, or our wires need to be moved to another pole, when I'm called, I usually reach out to Tony and others to let them know, as well as our field operations team. Sometimes things may slip through the cracks, and maybe we didn't see the order come through. So when that happens and I get a call from one of the council people or someone in the community, I then alert our field operations team, who sends somebody out right away to assess the damage and then move our wires if they need to be moved. And if it's someone else's wires, then we alert them that it's not Spectrum wires, it's another company's wires, so they can go out. But then whenever wire is moved, you still have to have the pole or someone get the pole and then remove that pole. So that's another process of going back out after all the wires are moved to remove the old and damaged pole.
Do you want me to keep going? Okay. So then, moving over to the utilities here, through the chair, the gentleman here in the blue, I'm sorry, I only wrote down Mr. Turner's name, but the gentleman here, I think you were onto it. Severe weather incidents are predicted to increase in frequency and severity in Northeast Ohio and the Great Lakes region. I think every climate forecast model tells us to get ready. We're going to have more severe weather events more frequently moving forward than we have in the past. If this was the first one and since 30 years, we had one 30 years ago, we had one a month ago, and we'll have one probably less than 30 years from now. So through the chair to the utilities specifically, how well prepared do you think you were for this event, now getting to look in with some hindsight, for a 30-year event? Do you feel that you were roughly where you thought you would be, a little less than where you thought you would be? Do you think you knocked it out of the park and this was like about as good as it could have been given what happened with 5 tornadoes? Or how do you feel about your preparation with a month to look at it?
I could start.
Sure.
So I would say from a First Energy perspective, we were
Bless you.
very
Bless you.
pleased with their level of performance with restoration efforts and communication and safety. From our perspective as a company, and the ability to restore, like I said, several 100,000 customers in a multi-day window. Can never commit that we are satisfied with it. That's why we go through robust after-action review activities to make sure that all work groups within the storm have an opportunity to talk about what went well what went not as well and where we can improve. We've learned quite a bit from this storm that we can utilize going forward, one of which was a zone concept that we adopted throughout the storm. Mr. Turner talked about our incident command structure, which is what we put in place, where we have hierarchy of controls throughout a storm, where essentially it's a flow as far as chain of command goes, with different organizations that are responsible for different aspects of the storm. What we did for this storm, based on the severe magnitude of it and the widespread outages and the widespread damage, we actually broke that structure down into 4 separate zones across Northeast Ohio, where we essentially implemented an ICS structure in 4 different locations, all reporting back to a main hierarchy, that I was part of from a centralization perspective. So I think that's just one small example of how we are going to be better prepared for the future, is understanding what went well. Like I said, the example was that zone concept where we really did tailor our focus to areas opposed to the widespread area per se. So like I said, lots of things to gain from it, lots of things to learn from it. I do want to reemphasize from a safety perspective, from a communication perspective, and really just an overall appreciation to all of the workers that supported First Energy and others as well. Very well done, very nice job, and the response was tremendous. Mr. Turner talked about 4,000 plus line craft workers, over 8,200 individuals across the state that supported this effort. That is certainly something of extraordinary measure to get that amount of resources in a very short time period that are working together, and more importantly, working safe to get customers back.
It's absolutely worth commending the line workers who I know were out there. I have neighbors who are line workers. I didn't see them for days. They were just out working. Somehow they slept. But hats off to them. They busted their tails out there, and we definitely appreciate, I think all of council appreciates the work that those men and women did to just put in the overtime and get the job done. Through the chair to you specifically, though, I know you have a larger footprint than just Cleveland, but you said 56,000 customers were down in Cleveland, but I didn't get a time frame on how long did it take for you to get all of Cleveland back up and running? 'Cause selfishly, I'm only going to be concerned with the Cleveland residents.
Sure.
Through the chair, thanks, Councilman Arch. We had all customers restored by Tuesday.
The 7-day?
Yes.
Okay.
So we had the bulk of them restored by Monday at midnight. The ones that were, I'll call onesie-twosies, are the ones where there was a lot of backyard damage, labor-intensive work, things of that nature. And that's to be expected in any large-scale event. We'll ping meters, we'll restore customers, similar to transmission down to distribution down to neighborhood. And then there's going to be some customers that the damage is so extensive, it is going to be heavy labor, backyard fed, working with veg management, other people to make sure we get those customers back on. But the bulk of our customers were restored by midnight that Monday.
Director, did you want to, or should
Yeah.
I just go to my follow-up question?
No, thank you, through the chairman of the council member. I remember the spirit of the question, and I remember hit it out of the park. But I would join everybody in commending the workers and the line workers for their response. It's just unbelievable, just humbling. But I think the question was in preparation for, or where we stood before a 30-year event, the tornadoes and the significance of this event. Were we prepared, or what would we do different? And we're still analyzing that. Obviously, vegetation management, forestry is a huge part of what we do in the city of Cleveland in terms of reliability. You can trim and prune until your heart's content, but when the tree is uprooted and goes across, there's not much you can do by way of management of vegetation. Capital investment is something that we talk about regularly for Cleveland Public Power in terms of technology, redundancy. Like at the beginning of the hearing when I was talking about Garrett Morgan and Nottingham with redundant feeds, we've talked about compartmentalizing our service areas and having redundancies in place in the event of loss of one feed, another feed, ATOs. There's a lot of different capital improvements that we talk about. Funding is another thing that council is very, very aware of when it comes to Cleveland Public Power. And then communications, right? Communications, we did better, I think, than we've done in a long time. I will never say we hit it out of the park, but in terms of the upfront messaging, the outage map, the twice daily communications to council's assistance for us in getting the word out, there's no call center in the world that can get 30,000 calls in a week. There's just isn't. And you wouldn't let us staff for that because we wouldn't have any line workers, right? But they did a great job. Very, very proud of all of our employees, top to bottom. And certainly continuing to look at how we can do better in the event of a significant event like this.
Thank you. Director, through the chair, I back to the redundancies. I know that we can't prevent 5 tornadoes from knocking down power lines. If power lines are going to go down when you've got nearly half a dozen tornadoes in a half an hour, that's to be expected. However, were any of the outages the result of a lack of redundancy? And I guess for people at home, or maybe even just for my own clarity, I think of a redundancy as instead of having a single line with one break, you have a circle and it takes 2 breaks. So that one break doesn't stop the circuit from flowing. That's redundancy. You have 2 ways around it. Were there any outages that were the result of there simply being one break and there was no redundancy to that particular line? Or were all of our outages the results of, there was redundancy, but there was also 5 tornadoes and thousands of trees that went down and took out the redundancy as well?
Yeah, certainly I would say the amount of damage that we saw, that did take away a lot of the redundancy that we have. When you talk about 340 plus lockouts, that's essentially, when we say lockout, we took out essentially the breaker at the substation. So without the ability to go to the adjacent substation and backfeed into that system to clear that lockout, that was essentially where we lost our redundancy. It wasn't until we were able to really start to clear those lockouts where we were able to start to kind of restore to get that redundancy back.
Okay.
When you talk about the magnitude of like what I said with the amount of outages and the damage, we have very robust systems in place, ADMS and so forth, technology in place. We weren't really able to utilize that to its fullest at the onset of the storm just because of the redundancy that you talked about being essentially not available yet. So as we got further into the storm, 2 days, 3 days, that redundancy did come back. And I would say from a CEI Cleveland type footprint, it is very robust in terms of having redundancy really when you benchmark it even across the state of Ohio.
I just have 2 more questions then. The number one issue that I think I hear about in terms of constituent calls to my office regarding power lines in the neighborhood is tree trimming, and I know we're calling it vegetation management, but I think we're talking about trimming trees. And the fury with which people call in when trees are cut down the middle, Y-shaped, or goalpost, or Three Stooges, whatever you want to call that tree trimming method that is so common and so ugly. And just, I have neighbors screaming at me because their street is destroyed and they hate driving down their own street. And we need to trim trees around power lines and we need to make them safe. And I guess my question is, tornadoes aside, just since we're all here, August 6th as a separate issue, how are we to know when a tree is properly trimmed, appropriately trimmed, safely trimmed, versus when a tree is butchered and just made to look disgusting? And I drive around Northeast Ohio and I don't see the same type of tree trimming in Westlake. I don't see the same type of tree trimming in suburban areas that I see in Cleveland regularly. And it's something that is brought to me. I know it's brought to some of my colleagues who have the same problems in their neighborhood. And I'm just curious what your thoughts are on how the trees are trimmed, why they're trimmed that way, and whether there's a better way to trim them.
Thanks to the chair, Councilman Hirsch. I'll have Mr. McGraw, our Resident Management Manager.
Good morning. We're on a 4-year tree trimming cycle at CEI, so every 4 years we're going to trim every tree that's encroaching on our power lines. And through the pre-planning process, we have contractors planning the work. they're looking for trees that are going to grow into our lines within 4 years. So the goal in our trimming process is to get 4 years of clearance from our primary voltage lines. So depending on the species, that could be very different. You know, a blue spruce tree could be a couple feet, where a silver maple might be 12 feet. So a lot of our trimming is dependent on the species. We do follow ANSI A300 standards with our trimming. You know, trying not to do too much crown removal. Our goal really is to trim back to what we trimmed the last time. So we're mostly removing water sprouts or sucker growth. That's our goal. Sometimes if a limb is, deteriorating over time, and to cut it back to that same spot would be more harmful for the tree, even though it's a little bit bigger cut. Leaving that lead there, we have to remove that whole lead for the health of the tree. As far as how, I guess, a constituent would know, or a customer would know if it's trimmed correctly. I mean, we do quality checks and monitor our tree trimmers all over CI territory, regardless of where they're trimming, to ensure that we are getting the correct way of trimming.
Through the chair, are you aware of a suburb that complains about the exact same thing that I'm complaining about?
In my experience, every suburb complains about our tree trimming.
Okay, through the chair, could you give me some addresses? If I could tell my constituents that this isn't Cleveland getting picked on, and show them pictures of where this happens in Lakewood or where this happens in, I don't know, Strongsville, that would probably make them very happy.
I don't know if I could give you addresses, but I do know that our complaints are not just centered from Cleveland. Like, we get complaints from all over when we go in and do regular maintenance tree trimming.
If at all possible, I would like to have some comparative examples of how the trees in Cleveland are trimmed the same way the trees in other suburbs. Please understand that my residents don't always travel to Strongsville and Lakewood regularly. They feel that this is Cleveland being targeted by lesser standards of work because people treat Cleveland with a lower standard of expectations. That's their thought process, and that's how they feel their neighborhood is being treated, sort of the redheaded stepchild syndrome. And if I can demonstrate to them that this is how that, what do you say, a maple needs more clearance space, this is how a maple tree in, wherever, was also trimmed the exact same way, that might actually satisfy their concern. And satisfied constituents is what I aim for. So if you can follow up on that and get me some examples, that would be greatly appreciated.
Yeah, I can work with David, and we can talk through that.
I had one last question. If I may. Please jump in.
We all second that request, so if it's shared with our chairman and Councilman Harsh, it'll be shared with all council members. It will help all of us, so wanted to emphasize that. Thank you.
My last question, I was given video footage of power lines on fire, like 2 days after the storm, and I don't remember if they were CPP. My ward, by the way, is almost evenly split CPP and First Energy, so I don't recall off the top of my head if this person was a CPP or First Energy customer, but the wires were on fire. It was rather disturbing, and they told me that somebody came out and said they were fine and left. They clearly didn't stay on fire, they didn't burn off, but my question to whoever wants to answer this, when lines are on fire, is it possible for that fire to extinguish itself and those lines continue to be okay? Or do those lines need to be replaced after a fire where you can see the flames running across the wires? It's pretty gruesome.
Yeah, I'll start. I would say that those lines would need replaced. That would be a damaged section of primary or secondary,
Okay.
for that matter, that would not be suitable to leave those lines in place after experiencing what you described as being on fire.
Yeah.
Agree. Hope they weren't ours.
Okay, so I'll just follow up with that person to figure out whose wires those are. It could have been also that the electrician came out and said, okay, it's not on fire now. We've got 10,000 other things going on right now. We're going to come back to this. And that my constituent didn't have all the information from that lineman. But
Correct.
those will need to be replaced.
There is always opportunity. The first step for a trouble worker per se that goes out and initially troubleshoots, by definition, they will isolate immediately. And sometimes, based on the severity of the damage, that will require a full crew to come back out and repair that section
Sure.
of line.
Okay, I'll follow up with them on that, but they can't be on fire and then just go back to okay.
No, sir.
All right, that's it.
All right,
Thanks.
thank you. Councilwoman Spencer.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I also, for those I haven't met, I'm Jenny Spencer, and I have the pleasure, like Councilman Harsh, my ward, Ward 15, which are the Cadell, Edgewater, and Detroit Shoreway neighborhoods, are pretty much equally shared between, in terms of power, First Energy and Cleveland Public Power. So I heard from many different types of customers after the storm event. I actually, though, want to start with AT&T and Spectrum. I want to educate myself on this to make sure I'm really understanding. So through our chair to AT&T and Spectrum, I think actually what I heard more from residents after the storm was related to cell service, actual inability to get cell reception or spotty cell coverage, inability to make phone calls, more so than internet. I think people understood that power and internet are inextricably linked and all of that, but can any information be shared about, I think that's very disconcerting for people when it's an emergency situation to have difficulty actually making phone calls. Through the chair.
So I'll jump in through the chair to Councilwoman Spencer. So when the event happened, our cell towers do have battery backup, and that battery backup only lasts for a limited amount of time. So we're in response mode when we know something like this happens, and what we try to do is get generators out as quickly as possible, and not only just for regular cell service, but as I mentioned, for our first priority is the first responders that share those towers as well, which is our Band 14 service. So depending on the availabilities and where the generators are, getting them deployed, we're getting guys out, wheeling these out. Some are in the back of trailers, trailer hitches. We're getting commercial power to central offices. So we're trying to get, keep emergency responders as our first priority. And at that time, our wireless engineers are optimizing the network, is what we call it, okay? So if we got towers that are down, we're kind of stealing signal from Peter to give to Paul to make sure people stay up. So while that service may be spotty at that time, till we get the generators and power restored back to that tower, that's when service gets back to its full capacity. I hope that answers your question.
That was pretty much probably the best layman's explanation that could have been given. No, that was good. But I mean, is there ever a chance that someone would not be able to make an emergency phone call? I'm not fully understanding, is cell service totally down? Is it limited? Wanting to make sure I understand an emergency situation for people through the chair.
I don't think, through the chair to the Councilwoman, I don't think our service was completely down. And if it was minimal at that time until we optimized the network. So there could have been a just, I can't say for sure, but there's always that possibility. But it's very short-lived.
And actually, Spectrum may not be able to, Spectrum doesn't provide cell coverage, or
We don't have cell towers. We do provide a fiber backbone for different cell companies in the event that a fiber damage is the cause of the cell phone or the cell tower being down. It's one of our highest priorities. We have a very targeted approach to getting those resolved as quickly as possible, and we have a lot of alarms in place that we usually know about it before the customers know about it. So, but we don't have any cell towers of our own.
Okay, thank you. I think I'm going to kind of dive in here. I guess I'll start through the chair to First Energy. I want to take a moment to recognize Ryan Collins, who is here. I can't express enough. I've said this at the table before. Mr. Collins is such an asset to your company. He is, I'll just say it to you, Mr. Collins, you are so responsive, and it's really been night and day from prior experiences. And so just want to assure you that, we are dealing with, storm damage aside, our offices contact First Energy, CPP, all of you all for literally the most minor issues, and they're all treated with equal deference and responsiveness, and I wanted to recognize that. So please pass that along to whomever needs to hear that. Thank you. So I think a lot of things were already covered. I did want to ask, through the chair to First Energy, the community appreciated gestures such as ice, water, all of those resources, the food bank contribution. I know that I have been approached by other community stakeholders, and in one case, performing venues in Gordon Square who just lost a week's worth of revenue, which to them is, imagine just you're getting a paycheck and having a week's worth of your paycheck gone, right? I mean, whatever analogy works, it's a huge hit to them, a huge hit to people in terms of lost revenue. And then there's interesting questions that are not for this table today about insurance providers and how they avoid claims or, saying that things are not eligible claims. So through the chair to First Energy, are you considering any additional support still for businesses or others who have, who really did suffer as a result of the storm damage? Would you be open to such requests?
Turner?
Thank you, the chair. Thank you, Councilman. Thank you, Councilwoman Spencer. Obviously, we have our foundation. So if there are 501c3s who have an interest in pursuing grants, I would direct them to go through our foundation for anything of that nature. Yeah, and the $100,000 donation back to the Greater Cleveland Food Bank was through the First Energy Foundation. So there is a link on our website for that.
Thank you. And then just a follow-up question to Mr. Turner is, through the chair, is there like a rapid response? I mean, a lot of times grants, it takes 6 months to hear back on a grant. If you submit a grant request, it just has its life cycle and its timeline. Is there a rapid response type request when it comes to immediate impacts of things like major storms and extended outages?
So seeing the damage that occurred in the Greater Cleveland area, it was only a natural thing for us to do, to see those who are going to be impacted, the severity of the impact, for us to make that donation back to the Greater Cleveland Food Bank. Outside of that, I can't speak to it. So if somebody says, hey, I'd like to see if there's a nonprofit that wants to do something on behalf of the community, I still would direct them back through the foundation for an application.
Thank you. I'll pass that along. I'd like to just use my remaining time, Mr. Chair, to touch base with Cleveland Public Power and to thank Commissioner Danielson, who was incredibly responsive somehow. You must have 5 phones going at once or something. I don't know. Commissioner Danielson was incredibly responsive. Please do pass along our tremendous thanks to all of our CPP workers and linemen, and especially those who were out in dangerous conditions working for us. Please do extend our appreciation on behalf of council.
Thank you.
I wanted to clarify the bringing in the outside vendors. There were two different terminologies used. There was the outside support terminology and then mutual aid. Wanted to clarify that, and I know that's been discussed at our table before, but just a quick update on those relationships and where they stand, and who do we call through the chair?
So I'll take a stab through the chairman to the council member. The mutual aid was through AMP, who is represents a number of our local municipally owned utilities. So the municipalities that were able to send assistance did by way of mutual aid. The other contractual assistance that was in the presentation and the commissioner alluded to was under the mayor's emergency. We did go out and hire an outside electrical contractor to come in and assist. And that those 2 resources were augmented existing staff and were tremendously helpful in restoring service to our customers.
That's very helpful, and this is maybe an uninformed question. I would think when there's such an acute event that there wouldn't necessarily be outside folks available, right? Everyone's doing whatever they have to do. How do we find in an emergency situation? You called it a mayor's emergency.
So that was I'm sorry, through the chairman to the council member, that was a contractor.
Right.
That was an electrical contractor. Correct. So yes, luckily they were available and they did respond to our requests. The mutual aid were other municipalities
Correct.
in the region that weren't as impacted by the storm.
Correct, okay. Well, I can follow up if I have more questions about that. I wanted to ask about, through the chair, I wanted to ask about the outage map, and did you find that actually, sometimes people become like fixated on, you offer a resource, but then it can lead to more questions. Did you find, it was important to hear that was the first time the outage map was really large use of that. Is it a tool that we want to continue using? Did it work the way we expected it to, through the chair?
Through the chair, short answer is yes, absolutely. It still requires improvements, especially following improvements to our grid and especially on the meter side. So it needs to be finer tuned to resolve all of those answers. In the meantime, I think for the vast majority of people, it is incredibly helpful. For those that are on the edge of the line, or that, in my earlier example, myself or Director Kane, if our power was still out following the overall restoration, then we're going to have potentially more questions, especially if we don't read the details on the outage map.
I already reached out to the commissioner about feedback provided about call center experiences, and I look forward to continuing to work together on that. I think, I don't know, this is not something that's easily quantified, but I think empathy, when you call and someone's just saying, I'm sorry, we hear you, we're working on it. If your power's not back, call us back in a couple days, call us back tomorrow. I don't know what it might be, but there is work to do in terms of when you finally get someone on the phone, how they're being communicated with. So I look forward to collaborating. I'm not sure how else to explain what I'm looking for, but I think people overall reported that they felt sometimes they felt people were rude or curt or short in their responses. Through the chair.
Through the chair, I think I do know exactly what you're talking about, and some of that I think highlights our cross-training emphasis has been on the nuts and bolts, and there are some of those things, soft skills, that like if you've been on the phone for a while, you know when you're trying to talk to a customer, they want to hear that empathy and understanding, not just the nuts and bolts. And so I think the newer folks, that they were just like, you call, you have a question, we answer your question. Okay, we're done. And so that can, especially in the midst of a storm like that, where it can be incredibly stressful to our customers, we do need to take it a step further, and that will definitely be part of our training in the future.
Soft skills, I like that term.
Yeah, that's actually what I was looking for. Thank you. That is, we are still people at the end of the day. We need the soft skills. And then I'll just conclude my time through the chair asking Cleveland Public Power, in terms of this overall experience, what else do you need? Is there something glaring where you said, I wish we had X resource, I wish we had, how can council be your advocate in terms of additional resources? And if you can't answer that at the table today, get back to us, because I'd like to know what else CPP needs to be fully supported.
Chairman, to the council member, I hope we're having a hearing specific to that in the very near future.
Well, we might be. All right.
All right, thank you, Vice Chair. Councilman Polensek.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank you for holding this hearing today. All of us were very much aware of the severity of the storm. And I was here in '93 when that hit, so I can tell you my opinion, this one was far more severe than the storm of '93, in my opinion, from the standpoint of damage and number of people that were out and for periods of time. And having the largest customer base of Cleveland Public Power customers in the city, I'm very much aware of what we experienced with the length of time it took to restore power. But one thing I wanted to drill down on, in October of last year, we passed legislation within the body to authorize CPP to go out for private storm restoration services. That legislation was never passed by the Board of Control, I've been told. So then the storm hit, and then there was the mayor's emergency came in, which the council president gladly signed because he knew the conditions that we were up against. But what I don't understand Mr. Chairman, to the director, and to whoever from the administration that can answer. Why wasn't that legislation ever acted upon that we passed in the city council?
Director? Thank you, through the chairman to the council member. So it was late October 2023 that council gave us at Public
Yeah.
Utilities the authority for supplemental line workers. We
Yes.
did develop the RFP. We did put it out to bid. We had 15 contractors identified on the mailing list. We had a pre-bid meeting where 6 appeared. We resulted in 4 bids.
Yes.
The cap on the ordinance was $500,000.
Okay.
The lowest bid was $1.6 million.
Okay.
The highest bid was $3.2 million. The 4 responsive bidders, I'm sorry, they were not responsive. 2 took exceptions to the bid specs, which means that they are non-responsive.
Okay.
So they're not lowest and best.
Yeah.
And 2 failed to fill out any of the required documents for the Office of Equal Opportunity.
Okay.
Which means thus it is also non-responsive. So then I had to go back to the Board of Control and recommend that all bids be rejected because they weren't legal.
Okay.
That was in June of this year. Because again, I think late April, early April was
Yeah.
when we got the bids back. We
Right.
opened them, we analyzed them, we scored them. We had to throw them all out. In June, I went to Board of Control and recommended it be rejected. August, we reached out to all of those contractors and tried to better understand how they did not legally respond to the bid.
Right.
We worked with all 15 and made contact with them. In September, we are, currently it's at City Hall going back out to bid.
Okay.
So it was, you know, I don't know what we're gonna do with a $500,000 cap. Just the outside contractors we used for this 5 days was $300,000.
Well, and so you touched on that. So I was under the impression, I was told that they only worked 3 days for the 300,000. Now you just said
Can you
5.
repeat that?
It was,
I'm sorry, I didn't hear you, Councilman. There
You
were
just
3?
you indicated that the private contractors that you brought over for emergency legislation that the council president signed, that they worked 5 days. I was told they worked 3 days for the 300,000.
it was 3 days.
Oh, I'm
It
sorry.
was more per hand.
3 days, 300. The point of it was the amount.
Okay.
The amount of dollars that, the ordinance is capped at 500.
Yeah.
The contractor that we had for 3 days was 300.
Okay.
So we have to figure out, even though it's going back out to bid through the
Yes.
chairman to the council member, I don't have a lot of
Okay.
warm.
Well, then we need to change that because here's the issue that I dealt with. So I had massive storm damage, so it took 9 days, between 9 and 10 days to get everybody on. Okay? Behind Collinwood High School, at the following Wednesday, which was what, 10 or 11, 10 days, I was still waiting for power to get on behind Collinwood High School. And I appreciate the commissioner coming out. I appreciate Mr. Ferguson. I appreciate everybody from CPP and First Energy who was out in there, because as you go into the eastern portion of my ward, then you get First Energy, extreme eastern portion. But when you touch on Jenny's comment a moment ago, when you had businesses shut down for a whole week, they lost their revenue. If they were in the food business, like the restaurants, et cetera, they lost everything unless they could find somewhere to store food. I had residents that couldn't go to work because they had standalone garages with no side door, and their garage door's down. They can't open their garage door. They can't not retrieve their car to go to work. So now they're trying to figure out how to get to work. So I had people out of work. I had businesses that lost revenue. So when you start adding up that, and that was my rub when I said, well, you know, 300,000 is a lot of money, but I will tell you the loss to businesses in this city and to individuals was far greater than 300,000. Because what does the city of Cleveland operate on? We operate on income tax. So when businesses are shut down, when people are not working, we are not collecting revenue. But the impact to those families, again, losing all their food, businesses shut down. So we have to have a real heart-to-heart conversation, Mr. Chairman, with the administration. We have got to have a better system in place, and I think the director is alluding to that, and I appreciate that, in storm situations, what are we going to do? What's the mechanism to bring people in as quick as we can to restore power? Because again, as we've heard, that we're seeing more storms, we're seeing more damaging storms, more damaging wind, rain. I mean, I was here when that storm hit right here at City Hall, and I never saw rain like that before, and wind, because on these windows, the water was actually coming through every joint in these windows. And the balconies actually filled up with water. And the water was coming back into our office. My office is on my side, because I'm up the hallway here. I could not believe, I stood there, I could not believe the water coming back into the offices from the balconies. So I'm very much aware of the severity of the storm. And so when I got out into the neighborhood, obviously the damage was extremely severe because that wind came right onto the, off of east of Bracknell and just devastated whole sections of my neighborhood. So this is the other thing I learned in this whole process, some things that I had not experienced before. The large trees that came down, extreme large oaks and maples, not only was it extremely sad to see them come down, the 100-year-old plus trees, but they lifted gas lines and water lines, which I had never experienced before. Again, people not being able to get out of their garages. We look to the utility companies for assistance in these types of storms, and yet, as I said at a meeting last night, and I continue to say at meetings since the storm, we look to the utilities for restoration, but in neighborhoods like mine, most of the poles that service the homes, quote unquote, the drops, are in the backyard. And if we cannot get to the pole, where people have their backyards like Fred Sanford and Son, where you can't get to the pole, then we got a problem. So I've said at every neighborhood meeting, you better clean out all the crap around your pole in your backyard if you got one, so we can get in there. And then the other thing is the vines growing up the poles. So I want whoever can address. I mean, I was and I want to appreciate the chair coming out because I kept him apprised of the situation. Councilman Casey came out, spent time out in the neighborhood along with the commissioner. But I'm looking at poles. You can't even see there's a pole. It's all green, full of vines. They spread out across the wires. So I've said to residents as well, if you have vines growing up pole in your backyard, get out a hatchet. Get out a saw and cut the freaking lines. Cut those things that are growing up the pole, because guys couldn't get up the pole. And then again, on Othello, what was growing up the pole? Poison ivy. So that was a whole nother experience in itself. So our citizens have to do their part too, if we're going to assist in restoration. But I want to make sure that we're doing everything we can. So I know Public Works is not here, Mr. Chairman, but it came very clear to me. We got to do more tree trimming. We have to do more tree removal. When we plant trees, we have to plant trees that make sense on streets so they don't go into the wires, okay? Because no one thought 50 years ago when they planted those massive oaks and maples where they would be at this point, and they're all up in the wires. So we had, in a community like mine, heavily treated community, we had a massive problem. I want to take the opportunity also to thank Mr. Costanzo and also Sandra because every time I CC the commissioner, I CC them, and I appreciate always their response back. So at the end of the day, we all have got to figure out how we're going to get on top of this. I also I got to mention the food bank, which is located in my ward, for the yeoman's job they did in supplying food and everything they could to families who were just wiped out. One of the saddest experiences I had on 154th Street off of St. Clair, to come down the street with all the damaged trees and lines down, and a mother walked up to my car with 2 little kids to tell me, Councilman, we have no food. We have no food. And if it wasn't for that food bank and some of the other organizations in the neighborhood, I don't know what we would have done. I keep seeing her face and what she said to me, holding a little one in each hand. We have no food. We have no food. And so we all got to figure out, especially from the city perspective, what are we going to do when we get into my colleagues, when we get into the budget hearings? We've got to figure out what to do with urban forestry. We need more equipment. We need more people working in urban forestry to assist with line clearance, tree trimming, et cetera, et cetera. We heard just a moment ago that every 4 years, CEI, First Energy, is trimming trees around their lines. Is there anyone at this table who believes for a moment that Cleveland Public Power and urban forestry in the city is trimming trees every 4 years? No. No. That's not happening. We need to figure out how to do a better job of that, because I understand the frustration of the people. And again, I thank everybody out there that was working, CPP, First Energy, et cetera, AT&T, Spectrum, everybody that was working to restore power. But we got to figure out better processes, better communication, and better response. And on that note, I want to continue to drive home, Mr. Chairman, to the director, to the commissioner, and to the administration. Approximately 30% of our residents, if not more, don't have computers. They're not going online to look at anything. You know what they're doing? They're getting on the phone and calling their council person. So what I became, again, I became another extension of Cleveland Public Power and, to some extent, First Energy, getting those phone calls. I was getting phone calls from people I knew in Euclid who were saying, you know, Mike, is there anything you could do to help us get our power restored? I said, no, I'm having a difficult time myself here. But the fact of the matter is, and that goes back to the call center, when you get these crazy storms, I'm not asking you to hire people around the clock, but you got to shift people in from other departments and divisions to answer the phones. That's all these people, they want someone to answer that phone. And when that phone doesn't get answered, or they sit on that phone for an hour or longer, because again, a lot of those old timers, they still have the hard lines. Thank goodness for them in many cases. They had the hard lines. So I'm thankful for what work did get done. I want to make sure, as it pertains to this emergency response, we got to figure out a better way to do this. We've got to have people on standby. And I would have had them working another 2 days. Well, it would have cost Councilman another $200,000. But the damage that was inflicted to families and businesses, we would have been better off to pay the additional money to have people working longer, because again, those businesses wouldn't have been devastated like they were, or people out of work. So it's a balancing act here. Balancing, but I do appreciate, again, the commissioner coming out. Again, Mr. Ferguson was out constantly. Margaret for taking my calls. The calls I placed to First Energy as well. But better communication, better partnerships. Tree trimming has got to be a priority. Then my very last comment, Mr. Chairman, on some of those poles you put up. This one's a good example to the right. You can tell that pole has been like that for God knows how long. That pole's been like that for. I've got a pole in front of St. Jerome's, 1500 Lakeshore Boulevard, that I have turned in for years. I mean, I'm talking about years. That needs to be taken out. That is fractured, sitting there with a new pole next to it. And I keep asking myself, going back to the chairman, and the other questions that have been posed there, why does it take, I mean, years and years and years, and there's still no resolution? So between us, I turn everything in, and this is what maybe I'm doing this wrong. As the commissioner knows and the director knows, I turn everything into CPP. Then I usually CC Anthony and Sandra. That's what, am I doing the right thing or I'm not doing the right thing? Who should we be turning them into?
Through the chairman to the council member, that method is fine. We then work on it and try to figure it out internally, and that's what we talked about at the beginning of the hearing.
I know.
And that's the takeaway, thanks to the committee and to the chairman. That's certainly something that we're going to work on and collaborate.
So everything should
better.
still go to you folks, and then you'll determine if it's First Energy, CEI, AT&T, or whatever the case may be.
Yes.
Okay, so get ready.
All right,
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Polensek, or Councilman Polensek. And I just want to reiterate that all those issues that you dealt with over in your part of town, we dealt with the same
Yeah.
over in our part of town, and we don't have CPP. So this isn't a one entity problem. This was something that happened that's everybody was affected pretty
Yes.
much the same way, and we can't put the blame on just one organization when
Oh, I'm not doing that,
when
Mr.
we
Chairman.
saw across the board, the whole city. Didn't
Yeah.
matter if you had CPP
Yeah.
or First Energy.
No, I'm not doing
I
that.
don't have CPP, and I didn't get my power on until early Sunday morning.
Yeah.
Right? And, you know, the one good takeaway out of this was just like when we had the blackout, you know, I know it's difficult as everybody's going through it, but I'd like to know how many conversations residents had with each other because you didn't have anything better to do.
Or your wife. Okay, go ahead.
So I don't want to just put the blame of this on one organization. I don't blame anybody. I mean, if Cleveland Public Power has that kind of power and authority to whip up 100-mile-hour winds and, you know, have the ability to lift 100-year-old trees out of the earth, same with First Energy, and God bless you, you have more power than I believe you do. But I don't want to quote the former mayor, but it kind of is what it is. And we dealt with it and we move forward. But what we need to figure out is how to do preventative maintenance so that when events like this happen, they don't happen to the severity that we got caught with, you know, with our hand in the cookie jar. So, you know, I don't want to walk away with this. Nobody on this side of the table is blaming Spectrum or AT&T or Cleveland Public Power or First Energy for the storm. None of us created the storm. It's just how do we collaborate better moving forward so that if something like this happens, that we can work better together collaboratively to assure that the ultimate people that we serve, you know, which is nobody at this table, has their utilities turned back on. Councilwoman Gray.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to, I don't have a lot of questions per se. I'm going to just say thank you I'm going to echo everything that the other colleagues have said, you know, concerning their community as well as my constituents in Ward 4. So I'm not going to, repeat those questions or those statements, but I do have a few things to say about the outage because, you know, due to the storm. First thing, I want to say kudos to not only Ryan Collins, but also to Phyllis Cleveland. They were a huge advocate to our residents, and they were spot on. So I want to echo, Jenny Spencer, Councilwoman Jenny Spencer on that. But also, one of the biggest concerns of the constituents was the time frame. That was the most concerning. Was the times what's the timing of the lighting. Like some people lighting didn't go off. Some had, came back on a day, 2 days. Some had to wait the 4 days. So that was the questions that came up is why why was the outing out maybe 1 day here, 4 days here? And they did lose a lot of their revenue as in, meats, vegetables per se. So I know that you explained that situation, but the residents didn't have an understanding, why their lighting was out 4 days versus somebody, 1 day. And I think that need to be explained much better. And I'm hoping that I can get someone at my community meeting, because that is not my expertise, to explain it in detail, only because I had one resident that actually called the office here and had a 3-hour conversation with my EA. 3 hours. That's how traumatic that she was in that state of not understanding that it wasn't the council fault that her lights were still off 4 days, but she had a 3-hour conversation with my EA, who was very went through a emotional state, because I wasn't in the office when I came back. She told me, and she did not know how to respond to any of her situation because her lights were still off in 4 days. So then I, in turn, had to call her back 3 times just to calm her down. And tell you something, I came and tell you to mention of the conversation that she had with me. But however, the residents don't have that understanding, and they don't care about the service, how quickly it should be turned back on. But I agree with our chair that this needs to be more explained in a more detailed way, with the residents per se, because they just don't care about windstorms or rainstorms. They just want their lighting on, like in 2 hours. After 2 hours, they panic. So I'm just saying that if I can get someone at my community meeting to explain this to the residents in detail so they can have a better understanding on how the council, we went through it too, but that doesn't matter. We just need to have a better understanding how to get through this, per se. So I just want to put that out there. And secondly, I just want to say kudos to Public Works. They are still out there cleaning up the debris from the storm. And some of the questions that was asked to me about the, through the resident is, we have large trees still down. And those trees has, affected the wiring. So you have some wires still just hanging down from the poles, not on the ground. They're just hanging from the poles, and that's dangerous, when you're walking down the street. So who take care of hanging wires from the trees? Chair to anyone.
I believe that would be whoever's wire it's hanging, right? I mean, if it's the lowest hanging one, it's usually AT&T or Spectrum, right? Those are the 2 lowest. The higher you go, I would hope that it's not an electric wire that's sagging so low that it
Right, but they're
affects the
not aware
sidewalk.
of
But
which wire
if you get us the address of where it is, we'll definitely figure it out, and they've all committed to working on it relatively quick. But if it's the lowest hanging wire, and maybe director or somebody, you want to explain the pecking order of the wires, Commissioner? Can you explain the pecking order of the wires on a pole?
Well, I think first, so the customer is back, whether Power, Spectrum, AT&T, the customer's back in service. The storm remediation continues, like you said, to Public Works. So they're going to go out and clear the tree, and then their chairman to the council member going to notify us for wires down, right? But they're not dangerous. They're not energized. It's safe. it just looks bad, and when they get the tree gone, then they'll come up and clean the wires. But to the hierarchy of the wires, I'm not going to speak to it. I think the commissioner is more than capable.
Through the chair, one thing, instead of just the hierarchy, one thing I would like to point out, yes, I believe it is safe now. If there is a down or low wire, whether you think it's cable or not, do not approach it.
Right.
Period. Even if you think there's no way that this is an electrical wire, don't approach it. Sometimes they can cross wires, even if you can see that is definitely a cable wire up the
Don't
line
touch it.
outside of sight. It can be touching an electrical wire, especially if you know it's storm damage. Everybody's power can be on, and there can still be a live wire that maybe wasn't reported. That being said, rule of thumb is the higher on the pole, the higher the voltage and the more deadly it is. But again, it can cross, especially with store damage, wires can cross. You can have high voltage where you don't expect it.
All right.
Okay. All
Anything
right,
else?
thank you. Yes, one more. Which chair to AT&T or Spectrum, who has the wire with the big, huge wooden, with the wooden wood on the wire? Who, governs that? There's a big piece of wood that is attached to the wire, whether it's hanging down and or across the wire. And it's over,
Are you talking something like that at the bottom?
Like this?
Or
no.
Are you talking?
Yeah, no.
Are you talking something like that where
No,
one of the arms are going north-south, the other one's going east-west?
It's not a broken pole, it's not a broken wood. This wood is actually attached to the wire over the street and/or it's just attached to the wire that's hanging down. That's none of that, it's not on any of these pictures. It is not on the pictures that the young man brought to our council meeting Monday. But these wood is attached to the wires and it's hanging over on the street and/or it's hanging down on a wire. And have you ever seen them? You never seen them
No,
chair to
but
the committee?
we did send an email out for you to
No?
send pictures. So
Okay, I'll
if
send
you could
pictures.
if you could get us that address, it'll get addressed ASAP.
So through the chair to the councilwoman, the easiest way to identify our wires is Spectrum is round coaxial cable, AT&T is flat. So we're the
good to
lowest
know.
on the poles, and our fiber and copper are flat drop service wires. And like Commissioner Danielson said, don't touch anything because you just don't know, right? If it's energized, if it's a hot pole or not. Call us. Homeowners, residents should call the 1-800-288-2020 number. Report just a down wire. It's a little tedious automated system, so you got to make sure it understands it, but it'll get you the right person. If it doesn't, email me, call me, FaceTime me, text me. I've had them all from
Okay,
everyone, so.
all right, I'll
More than
take
happy
a
to help.
picture.
Yeah.
But these are not down wires.
Okay.
These are not down wires. They're all over on the east side of town. They're across 131st. Are you aware of it?
Yes, Mr. Chairman, Councilwoman Gray, I know exactly what you're talking
Okay,
about.
there
There's
you
one
go.
right in front of my house, and they're throughout the city. I saw them in the suburbs too, but not as much. So I'll send it to our team when
Okay.
I get home and take a picture to see if they can identify who's doing that and why they're doing it.
Can you
Okay.
also send that to me as well?
Okay.
if you
Sure
don't
will.
mind?
Andrew, got this?
All right. Is that
All
it,
right,
Ms.
thank you. Yes,
Councilwoman?
that's it.
All right, Councilman Kelly.
I'll be quick, Chair. Through the chair to the team, first of all, I deal with Marty a lot, and he's very responsive and gets back. But I also got to deal with Brother Turner as well. Many phone calls, but we had water and ice at Cadell, so I was up there 30 days hacking it out with them. So I appreciate everybody picking up the phone. And that. The only other thing I want to say is, like Council Chairman Casey said, on our side of town, we had a lot of the same things as Collinwood, and I have a lot of residents just called because they really weren't using anything but calling our office and calling me. So it's good to hear you guys had a thorough overview. Looks like you're going to have some collaboration so that if something like this happens, maybe you've learned some things that can be helpful, even though you're two different entities. I appreciate you looking out for our residents. Other thing, listen, all the sisters and brothers that helped, and during this thing, it was not only mental, but it was physical work out there. I've done it. It was day to day, and it was long hours, and I hope I hadn't heard anything negative. I hope everybody was safe and got home to their families. So thank you very much, folks.
All right, thank you, Councilman Kelly. And I can attest that I went out, I witnessed workers on both utility ends. Those guys were doing things, and those ladies were doing things that you couldn't have paid me enough money to get up and do those things. So those workers, on behalf of not only Cleveland City Council, but the whole city of Cleveland, no matter where you were from, whether you were from Oklahoma or Cleveland Public Power or First Energy or Illinois, I saw them all over the place, right? Those workers deserve an enormous amount of kudos for helping restore the power, no matter who you had in the city of Cleveland. And getting back to the poll thing, I really want to drill down on the situation with the polls in the city of Cleveland. And what I'm asking is the four entities who are here at the table, who are the majority of the users of the polls in the city of Cleveland, if you guys are willing to collaborate together, to work together, to come up with some sort of study or some sort of whatever we want to call it, a working group to come together and try to figure this poll situation out. We have way too many polls, especially on our main thoroughfares in the city of Cleveland, and they need to be condensed and collaborated. So I'm asking if everybody at the table here, in one way or another, will collaborate with whomever we can find that can lead this charge to do a survey or a study of all the polls in the city of Cleveland to see, at least on our main thoroughfares to start with, to see if we can somehow collaborate all these utility polls and get things on one poll somehow, some way, so that we're not looking at, Poll City, USA. And I don't think that would be the four individuals actually sitting at this table. That would be somehow outsourced, but I want to know if we can get a commitment from each entity at the table today that you guys would be willing to participate in something like that.
Yes.
Spectrum, yes?
Yes.
AT&T, yes? Yes. Commissioner Dan, CPP?
Yes.
Yes, okay, great. Anything, you guys have anything else for Cleveland City Council? Again, on behalf of the residents of the city of Cleveland, thank you so much for what you went through in the storm, what you went through after the storm. And Councilman Polensek has one more question.
Clarification, Mr. Chairman, to whoever. Digital C, are those going to be actual wires going up?
They're going to be going from poles to houses potentially.
So that'll be another
But potentially.
line
but
of
they,
wire going up?
Yeah, but.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay. So again, thank you all. I think this is pretty historic that we brought all four of these entities to the table at one time. I don't know if it's ever happened in the city, but thank you so much for participating, and we look forward to working with you guys all in the near future. This meeting is adjourned until next Thursday, the 19th at 10 a.m.